What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Sports Muse podcast. Today is day 12 of 32 teams in 32 days, and we are finishing up the AFC South. So we've already finished up the AFC North, we've already finished up the AFC East, and the last team we have to talk about in the AFC South is the Houston Texans. All right. So if you're not familiar with my previews, what we do is we talk about additions and re-signings and draft picks and strengths and weaknesses. And I do an overall prediction for what I think the record is going to be and how some of the things on this team is going to turn out. So let's jump to last year on this very podcast. I predicted the Houston Texans would go 6-10. I thought it was going to be kind of a tough year. I didn't realize how tough it was going to be. And, of course, we'll talk about some of that here in a second. But definitely things are not looking great for this franchise, unfortunately. And whether you're a fan of, your favorite team and you hate every other NFL team, some of the stuff that's happened with this franchise, you just hate to see it. And we'll jump into that. So when we talk about the additions and re-signings for the Houston Texans, they get Tyrod Taylor, Rex Burkhead, Mark Ingram, Philip Lindsay, Chris Conley, Andre Roberts, Marcus Cannon, Justin McCray, Justin Britt, Shaq Lawson, Derek Rivers, Malik Collins, Jalen Johnson, Jordan Jenkins, Christian Kirksey, Vernon Hargraves, and Desmond King. Whew, that's a mouthful. So yeah, they brought in a lot of guys. They weren't happy with where that franchise is at. When I look at these additions / re-signings, I like what they did in the running back room. I think Philip Lindsay was a really solid pickup, and I'm actually surprised he didn't demand more money on the market. I think he's a guy who, at the very least, is a 10 to 12 carry a game back and can hit a home run any given time. But I think he's better than that personally. Mark Ingram's a guy who's clearly past his prime, but I think he's a very solid back. Rex Burkhead is a nice change of pace, third down back who can run out of the backfield. Tyrod Taylor's a guy who, has always had a bunch of different starting positions, ends up being kind of the mentor for a young quarterback. We saw him do that in Buffalo. We've seen him do it in San Diego, LA Chargers. Now we're seeing him do it in Houston. Chris Conley's a guy who, we'll talk about in a second. They lost Will Fuller. Clearly he's not as good as a Will Fuller, but I definitely think he's a solid guy who kind of plays that same role. And we see that, they take a chance on a Shaq Lawson. That Vernon Hargraves is a guy who kind of reinvented himself a little bit. Desmond King, who I kind of like. So I do like some of their additions. As far as departures, they lose Duke Johnson, Will Fuller, Darren Fells, Zach Fulton, Nick Martin, Carlos Watkins, J.J. Watt, and Terrell Adams. J.J. Watt's a big one, man. It's not only he's just a great player who's won several Defensive Player of the Year awards. He's a guy who kind of embodied the franchise, right? He's a guy that when I thought of the Houston Texans, I thought of J.J. Watt. Will Fuller's a guy who hasn't been healthy very often, but when he is, he's electrifying. Duke Johnson never really kind of found his feet in Houston. But a guy that I didn't mention, and I don't want to touch on it too much, just because you can do a whole podcast episode just about this guy, is Deshaun Watson. I doubt we're going to see him play this year. If we do see him play this year, it's going to be in very limited capacity. We kind of all know of what he's facing as far as, off the field issues. Whether that's true, whether it's not, is not for me to decide. But I do wish the guy, if he did do it, he figures out kind of his life. If he didn't do it, I hope he kind of gets justification and gets back on the field to, kind of live out his livelihood as soon as possible. But that is a huge loss because he's one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. When we jump to draft picks, the Houston Texans clearly, over the years haven't had many draft picks because Bill O'Brien traded them all for just pretty bad trades. And at the time they looked bad, and retrospect they're probably even worse. But with their first pick, which was in the 3rd round, they get Davis Mills, quarterback who's kind of a project. Who I'll talk about him here in a little bit. I actually kind of talk about him a little bit in my bold prediction for the Houston Texans. But he's a guy that I like. Definitely has upside. Definitely raw. So we're gonna see how that kind of plays out. Nico Collins, who I really do like. He's another guy who I think was a solid value pick. They get Brevin Jordan. As far as the Houston Texans, they didn't have a ton of picks, like I mentioned, but I think they did well with the picks they did have. As far as team strengths are concerned, they don't really have any clear strengths. The running backs are pretty good with David Johnson, Lindsey, Ingram, Burkhead. I imagine one of those guys are going to end up getting cut, before the season starts. But that's a really solid running back room. And the reason I think that's a strength is because Tyrod is a running quarterback. If we see Davis Mills this season, it's always nice to have a really strong running game behind a young quarterback. So I do think that's an important strength that the Houston Texans have. The weakness, the organization as a whole looks really bad right now. As far as they had a head coach kind of being the general manager, it didn't look good. We knew it wasn't going to turn out well. Well, it didn't. The Deshaun Watson stuff, JJ Watt kind of really turned his back on Houston, whether that's right, wrong, or in between. Just things haven't looked good for that organization. So you're hoping they turn it around because, as a player, they all talk. So some of them might be kind of questioning whether they want to land in Houston as a free agent destination. Biggest question mark, and again, I don't want to deep dive into it, but it is a question that if you're a Houston Texans fan, you ask yourself, will you ever see Deshaun Watson not only dress up as a Houston Texan, but will he ever play football again? Is a huge question we have to ask ourselves. And right now it's looking a little bleak. Again, if he did do it, I hope he gets the punishment he deserves. But if he didn't, or if it's whatever, I don't want to jump into it. I would love to see him on the field again because he's fun to watch. But I'm not saying whether he did it or not, or if he did do it, it doesn't matter, because that's definitely not the case. As far as record prediction, it's going to be a tough year. I think it's a year where it's a real feeling out process of, the veterans. Do they want to be there? Do they want to help build something from the ground up? With the young guys, who's going to produce? Who's maybe, not going to be on the team in a few years? What positions do you need to draft? So as far as record prediction, I said 1-16. I think they end up stealing one against like the Jags or the Jets. But I think it's going to be a pretty tough season. I think they're going to end up probably with the number one overall pick in this year's draft. But that's going to be tough, man. Because but some of these teams that I've said are going to be in a tough spot. They have a little bit more looking up for them than this Houston Texans team. As far as bold predictions, I said Deshaun Watson will never play for the Texans again, but I do think Davis Mills ends up being a very solid NFL quarterback. I don't think he becomes elite by any means. At the worst case scenario, I think he ends up being like a Daniel Jones, which definitely isn't a bad place to be because you look at Daniel Jones, the biggest problem with him is he was a high draft pick. Davis Mills was a third round pick. He is a little bit of a project. We're not going to see him. If we do see him this year, it's not going to be until probably a little later in the season, even though I said the same thing about Justin Herbert last year. I turned out to be wrong. But I think Davis Mills, we don't see him until a little bit later. But I do think they kind of have at least a placeholder at the very least for the quarterback position. Houston Texans fans, I know this wasn't the most upbeat, positive podcast as far as your team goes, but please let me know what you guys think. Drop in the comments, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to this season? Who are some of the players you think are going to step up on the scene? Or what do you think they should be drafting or looking for either, the rest of this offseason or next? Let me know in the comments. If you guys want to support the show, I would greatly appreciate it. Just click that like button, click subscribe. Please help support the show, guys. And like I said, if you guys want to check out the rest of my previews, please go back and check those out. I have a big playlist of them. But guys, I'll see you next time. Hey guys, thank you so much for sticking around for the entire video. Thank you for supporting the show, clicking that like button, subscribing, comments, all that fun stuff. If you could just take one more second and check out Rep Sports, check out Raise Energy. They are partnered with this podcast. They are help supporting me. So if you go and check them out, it's the best tasting energy drink on the market. 100% guaranteed. They have supplements, protein, pre-workouts, recovery, all that stuff. If you guys check them out, and you use promo code SportsMuse when checking out, you get 15% off of your order. And who doesn't like, some money off of their purchase? That's awesome. So definitely check them out. And like I said, it helps support me. It helps support them. So please check them out, guys. And thank you again so much for sticking around.